Welcome to the Greater Call Podcast, Episode 5, Learned Leader. I am Mark. That is my pastor and good buddy, Kyle. Kyle, how are you doing? It's so good to be with you.
Doing so good, man. Thankful to be back with you after a fun week in the world in which you live in on a regular basis. But for all of us who are sports fans, what a fun week. I wore all of my gear today just because of you, honestly. Even as we get started, man, I wanted to say this to anybody who's watching or listening, just how fun it was to, watch sports history. I think, no matter what you're a fan of, watching the gentleman recently beat Wayne Gretzky's, all-time scoring title in hockey, which I could care less about hockey, is just cool to see. And then obviously see what Rory did in the Masters. And honestly, just thinking about you and, we had Amen Corner on all week at our house. And you just did such a fantastic job, man. And what a cool opportunity. I was thinking about it on just, you got to call the most prestigious 3 holes in golf at the most prestigious golf tournament in the world. And you got to do it on a weekend where a fan favorite for a lot of people accomplished something that only a few people have ever accomplished, with Rory winning the Grand Slam, man. And I was thinking about you the whole time on, like, it's probably become so normal to you to be able to call stuff. But to those of us watching, I'm like, how cool is that you got to be a part of that? And I just even think what we're talking about today with Joshua and all the things that Joshua's story is going to show us. I would imagine you've had some of those moments over the years just doing what you get to do as well. But, man, congrats on just such a cool weekend for you.
Thank you, Kyle. It was incredible. The Masters, such a special place. Amen Corner is kind of poetic, I guess, to be a part of that segment of the show and take that to the world. And it's a thrill and an honor. And to be alongside for a lot of Rory's journey and to see him then complete the career Grand Slam, which is indescribable. Only the 6th person to have completed that is mind-numbing, and to be thankful or to be fortunate enough to document it is incredible. And in many ways, as I've watched him throughout his career, I've seen real faith, real resilience, all those sorts of things that we talk about here on this Greater Call podcast, where we want to help people become better leaders, better teachers, better coaches, better business people, better fathers and mothers, all those sorts of things. And Rory has always been out there on full display. And so it's almost a lesson in leadership to have watched him and then get to document the whole thing. And to that, incidentally, with Joshua, we've had David, we've had Joseph, and we've had Paul, and then we've had Noah. I feel like, and this was me, not you. So this is I guess the insides of me wanting to go in this order, because we're putting the cart in front of the horse a little bit. And some backstory: if we had a son, my wife and I, Tracy, his name would have been Joshua, because
Wow.
I've been so enamored with this guy. I'm one of a few people to have a book in the Bible named after him. And it's just the story through the book of Joshua is incredible to me. But we are putting the cart in front of the horse because he was a devout learner and follower of Moses, who's one of the heroes of the faith. So I want you, before we dive into Joshua and learn from the character that he is, give us the little quick sort of whistle-stop tour of who Joshua is and what he accomplished.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, the quick version is just he started off as Moses's assistant. Just kind of a guy that followed him around and decided to just learn from him and see what he did. And then obviously God called him to a much higher calling in that, as he ended up being a military leader and became one of the faithful spies to go look out at this promised land that God had promised his people, that they would take this land. And then really it was decades of preparation, Mark, where Joshua ends up becoming the central figure of this conquest of Canaan, God's chosen land for God's people. And he really guided Israel and the military through strategy and his faith, and really his reliance on, in his story, on the presence of God. And his life was ultimately marked by, I would say, obedience, courage, strong spiritual legacy. It's really probably summed up in his famous words were, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord, which is in Joshua 24, I believe. And I think just from a biblical perspective, he was fearless. And I think we'll talk about a little bit of that later on in the story, is it even possible to live a fearless life? But Joshua is the example in the Bible, one of the examples in the Bible of how you can live a life that might not have opportunities to have fear, but you can work through those with faith. So just an incredible leader. And like you said, you don't get you don't get a book of the Bible with your name on it for just doing something small.
Yeah. It's funny when you went to Joshua 24:15.
Yeah.
But as for me and my household, I got an alert on my computer if you heard a noise there, and that was, don't forget to mention one of the Bible verses, because there's so many. I mean, if you go through the book of Joshua, it's belted out at you all the time. Be strong and courageous.
Yeah.
Have I not told you, be strong and courageous? I mean, this is an exercise in really the mindset it takes to undertake big things,
Yeah.
which he did. Because, the first one of those big things, he was the only person to go partially up Mount Sinai alongside Moses.
Yep.
When Moses was given the 10 Commandments by
Right.
God. Didn't go all the way up, but that speaks to a special person. And obviously Moses had earmarked this young man, and in the end he was validated by God for picking Joshua. So I want to get into maybe what Moses saw in a young Joshua and how we can learn some of that stuff. And the first thing is that he was known as Moses' constant shadow.
Yeah.
It's like he was always around his mentor,
Yeah.
always learning, always watching this guy who took the Israelites out of Goshen, out of Egypt, all the way through the desert for 40 years.
Yeah.
And then eventually Joshua takes them into the promised land. So I want you to comment a little bit, because you're a leader of people, of, having that young person who just has that appetite for
Yeah.
learning. You know the one I'm talking about. Characterize that person.
Well, I think it's John Maxwell, Mark, that says you can't lead unless you have learned how to follow.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people, specifically in young leaders in our world today, they don't want to follow. They just want to lead. They want what the person who's 50 has, but they want it at 25. And again, in the world we live in, you can get places faster, but fast isn't always best. Fast might just mean that you crash harder when you get there. So I do think the characteristic of learning how to follow before you lead is very important. And I think you saw that in Joshua with Moses. He didn't try to manipulate anything. He didn't try to go before Moses. He didn't try to have conversations behind the back to get people to believe in him or follow him. I think that's what happens in the world today. We live in the the corporate world and this the world of leadership. People are always trying to position themselves to climb the ladder. And in God's economy, He's asking us to learn, to grow, to be developed. God's way more interested in developing your character than He is getting you to what you're called fast, because the Bible's very clear. It says before but pride comes before the fall. Yeah. And most young leaders, if they get somewhere too fast, think they got there on their own, and then they fall hard. I think older, wiser leaders followed someone, learned a lot, allowed there to be time in between what they felt like they were promised and the payoff date of that promise. So learning how to follow is one of the greatest leadership characteristics that you can develop in your life.
I'm led to say this. I want to mine this a little further, because pride comes before the fall. It's one of those cliches. We've all heard it. We've heard it so much. We're like, oh, whatever, and it goes over the head. And the fall, I don't want us to take this too literally. Yeah. And I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. I'm talking from personal experience here. The fall is not the crash and the loss of the job or something like disastrous like that. The fall could be substance abuse, depression, anything along those sort of lines, when the train that is me, let's say, going toward my goal gets upset a little bit. And I get my focus off the goal because maybe I've been so locked up in it and trying to position myself that I'm not doing what I should be doing on a day-to-day basis. And as a result, that house of cards comes crashing in, and then we rely on something else to kind of make us feel okay. And we almost numb the events that are going on around us. Are you feeling me where I'm going here?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's the number one problem with our world today is the speed in which we want things to happen. And then our mind and our spirit, and we weren't even wired to move that fast. We weren't wired to succeed that fast. Like we are a body of systems. Those systems have to all work together for us to live a healthy life. And I think the same thing is true with leadership, and is that our body, we're not wired to move that fast, for our mind to process information that fast. But our world has changed. There were a lot of the fall, like you said, it's not just pride, it's our mind falls, or we have this fall in fatigue, or we have these falls in our marriage because we're not prioritizing the right things. And I think there's always preparation before promotion. I think you have to, I had a mentor tell me one time, you've got to grow through the grind. That the best coffee, Mark, as you're a coffee person, is not from a Keurig where it's fast. It's from an espresso machine where it grinds the beans and puts weight on it. And then there's the pressure of the water, and then you get great coffee. But that's a process. The Keurig is fine. You'll get coffee, but it won't be nearly as good as the one that grinds the beans, presses it, puts the pressure of water and the heat through it. That coffee's always better. But I think we live in a world that likes the Keurig.
I missed my Keurig this morning because it was malfunctioning, but that's an aside. Okay. Okay. So here we are. So now here's young Joshua. He's followed Moses. Now we're towards all of this long time in the desert, where Moses was the great leader, but the Israelites were worshiping false gods and all sorts of stuff was going on, and he had a lot of things to deal with. I've read that when Joshua was the leader and took the Israelites into Israel, there was a period of great peace and great discipline. So it made me think all the more about Joshua. And then to that now, Moses is told they're standing on the edge of the promised land, Canaan. And Moses, correct me if I'm wrong, is taken onto a big mountain, and looked over there and he said, God's like, that's the promised land. You're not going to go in there. Protege Joshua is going to take folks into that. And I'm trying to put myself in Joshua's shoes to say, here I'm next to this man who I've revered for 40 years, maybe more. And now he gets to step aside and I have to do this. I mean, the weight on those young shoulders must have been sort of immense. I mean, talk about dealing with a life challenge. Yeah, it's this big reward. It's what we've all hoped for. It's the goal. But now it's like, oh, shucks. Help us through that oh, shucks moment, because so many leaders get that. You know, we wanted the job, and all of a sudden it's thrust upon our shoulders, and we're like, oh, heck, what now? You've written here in notes, you like faith over fear. To me, this is like, sure, it's great to go in, but there's that element of the unknown, the fear. Yeah. And you talk about faith over fear with Joshua. Let's go here. I think this is fascinating to learn from.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think fear is a natural emotion, right? I mean, we all face it. It's easy to look on at you from a distance, in which you did at Amen Corner this weekend, but I would imagine there's multiple moments in that last round featured group coming through. You've announced Amen Corner for years, but this is Rory's on the cusp of a grand slam, and you want to make the right call. You want to say the right thing. You want to say something that's memorable. And to think just because you've done it for a long time, you know, that there wouldn't be any fear in that moment. It's like me getting the opportunity to speak somewhere. So sure, 15, 16 years of doing it, but it's a new room, it's new people. You want to say the right thing. You want to help people out. Fear is a natural emotion, and it's not a sin. You know, as somebody who's listening to the podcast that's a follower of Christ, it's not a sin to have fear. But I do think that what God offers us through his perfect love, the verse in 1 John says, there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out all fear. That is, the closer we are to God, the more we are consistent with the things God asks us to do, that when fear creeps in, we don't have to lead and live in fear, but we know how to get that moment of fear that can come over any of us. And we all know that feeling. We know as Christians how to pause and take our faith and make that greater than our fear, knowing God placed us in this moment, at this time, in this situation for a purpose. And when you do that, there's just a confidence and a courage that overwhelms and overweighs the fear that might come up naturally. So I do think our faith is very important. You know, I wonder how people that don't have faith, I don't know how they walk through fearful moments. I don't know how they have something that's greater than the fear that comes up. We as Christians, we have our faith that we can have courage that overweighs and overwhelms that fear that might come naturally. And I'm sure Joseph had those moments. I mean, I think Excuse me, Joshua had those moments.
Yeah, that was, look. Here's the thing.
Probably
Here's
had
the
those
common,
moments.
yeah, here's the common thread. It's happening throughout every single one of these podcasts. The more I research
Jesus
these
had
guys,
that moment, Mark. We're recording this on Easter week. Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane said, when he was getting ready to go to the cross, he knew it was about to happen. He literally prayed to heaven and said, Father, if you can take this cup from me, do it. But thankful for us as Christians, he said, not my will, but your will be done. But he had a moment where the Bible said he was sweating like drops of blood. And I would say because that was a moment of fear of what was about to happen. So we all have it. But then even Jesus in that moment, his faith was greater than his fear because he said, not my will, but yours be done. So
yeah.
I do think faith over fear is a big thing.
Yeah, you've sent me. I'm looking at my phone here. I texted you, and the question was, is it really possible to be fearless? Because you hear people say, like the motivational speech, go in there and go and be strong and be fearless. And I'm like, okay, I've been that guy that you're talking to. And I'm like, yes, I'm in. Yes, I'm in. Yes, I'm in. And then someone stands there, our giant, if we go back to David.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, God, I'm scared to death over here, but we're going to do this anyhow.
Yeah, I think God's the only one that can ultimately be fearless in the literal sense of God can only be the person fully without fear. But we are invited into this relationship with God. And as Christians, we're invited to live fearlessly by continually choosing our faith, by continually trusting in God's promises, by continually looking back at the history of our life and what God, every moment where there's always been fear, God's always come through. And just being led by him allows that fear to lessen. Not that we can never be fearful, but with God, we can become more fearless.
Love it. Okay. Again, I'm sort of bouncing around the show, but I'm trying to paint the picture of who Joshua was, the person, because leadership lessons, you can have folks say to you, do this and don't do that, and do this and don't do that, and consider this. But Joshua is like a shining example of what it looks like to be a great, brave, courageous, faith-filled leader. Something that's emblematic of what this podcast goal is.
Yeah.
So now this is when he's assumed the mantle from, to get my people right, Moses.
Yeah.
Okay. But before that, they camped out on the edge of the promised land.
Yeah.
And Moses sends 12 scouts over into Canaan.
Yep.
They come back with a report. 10 of them give it, oh, there's giants over there. We've got no chance. We're cooked. I don't even know why we wasted our time. This is going to suck. Then Caleb and Joshua come back. They saw the same stuff, yet they go, it's a land of milk and honey.
Yep.
The grapes are like as big as you can imagine, and the wheat is as high as an elephant's eye. Now I'm paraphrasing, but this is the thing. So I'm wondering about this outlook.
Yeah.
Because people can look at the same thing, and people can have like one perspective or the other.
Yep.
Clearly, Joshua and Caleb, and we'll talk about Caleb in a future podcast. Clearly, there was something different about how they were bred, or at least how their mind worked, to be able to go in there, see the giants, and they were described by the other 10 scouts as if they were so big. Right. We felt like grasshoppers. Right. We were so small. So to look upon these folks, because you're spying, and then to go, man, this place is great. I cannot wait to get in there. I want you to talk about that.
Oh, man, come on. I mean, find me a leader that doesn't have optimism as one of their characteristics or their leadership traits that has led something successful and led it long term. And I'm sure there are some, but I promise you there's the majority. It leans on the side of they don't see the glass half empty. They see it half full.
Yeah.
We get to see the same glass. How do you see it? And I think Joshua was a guy that saw the glass half full. I think Joshua was a guy that had optimism. I think Joshua was a guy that brought solutions and not just problems, which is a great leadership characteristic as well. And honestly, Mark, and I know you hate when I do this on the podcast, but man, that's one of the things that's very attractive about you is you see the glass half full. You encourage people. You call people up. You do that in the way you announce on TV. You always have optimism. You always speak from things from what I call the tree of life, that you see things on how they're intended to be, not what they are. You see the best and not the worst. And I just think that's what Joshua did in that moment. And we have the opportunity to do that every day with our kids. We have the opportunity to do that every day in our business. We have the opportunity to do that in our words and the way we say things. is we have the opportunity to speak life, the Bible says, or we can speak death. And I think Joshua was a guy that chose to speak life. And I think he learned that because of what we talked about a minute ago. He chose to follow and to learn and to grow and to prepare way before he was ever put in the moment to transition into his new role as the leader.
The big word there's you've used is chose. I hear choose
It's
because
great.
we have an option. You could
Yes.
choose good or evil. You could choose happiness or sadness. So here, I guess my follow up to you is, in your experience, I know from my experience as a coach, but I'd love your take first. Um, that is a learned skill. It's
Mm.
not like we're born inherently depressive. Something happens and we start to go down that road, because everything you face, you can decide one way or the other. It's black or it's white.
Yeah.
Um, so as a pastor, I want you to unpack that for me, please.
Yeah, well, again, my viewpoint of life in the world is going to come from the Bible. So for those of us, listening to the podcast, that's not your moral compass.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to hear this from. It still doesn't hurt to hear this. I don't. I think one of the greatest things about our faith, Mark, is the goal is that every day, in every situation, every year, we look more like what God wants us to look like. So again, the question is, then what does God want us to look like? So for me, I go, if I'm emulating somebody, so if Joshua followed Moses, if you followed a coach for years and then you became a coach, if there's a professional golfer that had a mentor and a swing coach and somebody they followed, the goal is we look more like that person
Yeah.
as we continue to develop and continue to grow. Well, for me, I want to look more like God. And I think that's everybody's ultimate goal as a Christian, is to look more like God. So then what do you follow? You follow God's character. And God's character is very clear in the Bible. It's the fruit of the Spirit, that when you say yes to God and God starts to develop your character, it's love, joy, peace, patience, kindness,
Yeah.
goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. So for me, those are the areas I'm always looking on at my life and going, how can I grow in my patience? I can have a teenage daughter. How can I grow in my self-control? I can coach Little League, coach pitch baseball. How can I grow in my joy? I can choose to put a smile on my face even when my circumstance for the day doesn't want me to do that. And I don't do that perfectly. You don't do that perfectly.
No.
I think what we do and how we do that is we choose to grow in our patience. We choose to grow in our peace. We choose to grow in our kindness. When somebody might want to say something or comment on social media about us and they don't know us, it's easy to pop off. It's easy to respond. It's easy to put somebody else down. It's harder to be patient and self-control, kind and gentle. And that's what makes us different than the rest of the world. Not better, just different, and in
Yeah.
some ways better. But it does make us different. And I do think that's what people are attracted to you. They're attracted maybe to me. They're attracted to a Christian in their workplace or their family, because we do respond to things differently than the rest of the world might respond to them.
Yeah, that's so good. Personally, and as I approach that in 20 something years of being a college coach, and I've been teaching golf since Moby Dick was a minnow. I mean, 1995. I don't think you were born yet. But that's an aside. And I always just was very like dollars and cents about the thing. It's like you either choose good or you choose bad, and it was very much a do thing. And it's like if you find your mind going, or you sense your mind going wrong, you change your mind. It's like it was just a literal sort of a deal, and that's how I approached the whole thing. And in a way, it was successful. But when I learned about the heart of God and the fruits of the Spirit, it's like it was because of conscience
Hmm.
that I work on becoming more patient, because I'm not. It's because of the conscience within, that little voice. Now I'm aware of it. I dulled that so badly, because I would like fly off the handle in the blink of an eye and not be very gentle. You're laughing, so I know you can sympathize.
No,
Where
for sure.
previously it'd be like, I was wrong there and I got to be right. Now it's like it's coming from a different place. And when I read about Joshua, it's like all of the stuff of his came from a different place. It wasn't that much head knowledge, really. I think there was a lot of spirit and soul to this. You agree?
Well, I think that's why God's so cool. I mean, he called them fruits of the Spirit because fruit has to grow. So it's
Yeah.
never we're going to attain the patience of God, or we're never going to attain the goodness of God, or we're never going to attain the full peace of God, but we can grow in those. And it's a lifelong journey. It's not something that we just wake up one day and we're there. It's a lifelong journey to look that way. And yeah, you're not perfect at it. I'm not perfect at it. But the goal is each year. And here's a practical mark. Every year
Mm-hmm.
I ask God, give me the fruit of the Spirit this year that I'm going to need and I'm going to need to grow in more than ever before. And for me, I print off all the verses about that fruit of the Spirit. I look up books that I could read about that fruit of the Spirit. I find a podcast or two that talks a lot about that particular thing. If it's self-control, I'm going to find the books about self-control. I'm going to print the Bible verses out about self-control. I'm going to find a podcast that talks about self-control, because I think God gave me that fruit of the Spirit. One, I need to grow in it, because two, I might need it this year more than ever before with things I can't see. So it's just a great practical for people if you want to grow in that, that I do every year in January.
You've touched a nerve there with me.
Mm.
Isn't it crazy how and whoever's watching this, whether you're a Christian or you're secular or non-believer or whatever, remember, folks, you can interact with us on our social handles at The Greater Call. If you do want advice or prayer or something, Kyle certainly will reach out.
Or even
But
practicals, Mark. If they want a
yeah,
book on one of those characteristics, I'll gladly
cool.
give some recommendations to the 2 best books on joy that I've ever read.
Well, isn't it crazy how, like, when I've prayed for courage,
Mm.
it's not like I get some heavenly dump on my head. It's like I get put in situations where you have to exhibit courage, and to that now. So here we are. So there's the promised land with all of the land of milk and honey and the good stuff. And we've got to cross the River Jordan in
Yeah,
harvest season, which is when it's flooding.
yeah,
Okay. So it's not like God's like, you go over there and just have a great time, and I'm going to just supernaturally pop a bridge up there in the middle of nowhere so you can waltz over there.
right.
No, you're going to go through the River Jordan at the flood stage. And this is where that courage and that faith comes in. Because the first thing Joshua does is he prays to God, and God gives him specific instructions. And you can talk about this, about how the Ark of the Covenant would go ahead.
Right.
But then talk about motivation. Because I know that the entire tribe, or all the tribes of Israel, the thousands of them, I'm sure they've caught wind of what the other 10 scouts had to say about the promised land. So now there's trepidation, there's fear, there's anxiety, there's all that stuff we experience before we go into something big, even if we kind of know it's going to be good if we do well.
Sure.
And here Joshua gives the marching orders, and then he says to all the Israelite folks, he's like, consecrate yourself before we do this. Or in other words, clean up your act a little bit.
Yeah.
Get right with God a little. And I read that verse over and over and over again, and I'm like, golly, how many times when I've been at the doorstep of something big have I really just taken a minute to say, all right, God, let's forgive me of my stuff. Let's clean me up a little bit. Let me consecrate myself so that when I go into this, I'm of the right mindset, the right attitude, the right comportment, the whole thing, so I can go in there and make a difference, as opposed to just going into the promised land and going, all right, bring it on, bring me the good stuff.
Yeah, no, I think we're all guilty of that. I think, what Joshua got the opportunity to see with Moses was how close Moses was to God through all of this. And I can't imagine that didn't become a part of Joshua's DNA, that as he got ready to cross, as he got ready to march Jericho, as he got ready to go into the promised land, that there weren't these moments where Joshua, took a deep breath off to the side or got into his tent and prayed and got, I don't think he just walked into all this with natural courage. I think it was supernatural courage, because he was close to God. And I do think in a time of transition, you have to lead with confidence. And I think Joshua did that. I think he took the leadership shift from Moses and he led with confidence. I think great leaders bring calm and clarity during transition. They don't just fill shoes and forge ahead. I think they lead with confidence and bring clarity and calmness to the situation. I think Joshua did that. I think he told people, this is what we're doing. This is where we're going. Here's what you need to do for us to get there. And I think that's what people are looking for, is someone to lead with confidence when there's transition. And then I think Joshua trusted the process, even when it didn't make sense. Sometimes God will ask us to do things that doesn't make sense, but he watched Moses, as you said earlier, as he followed him as his shadow, and Moses did things that didn't make sense, but Moses trusted the process and God always came through. And I think as Joshua was asked to do things that maybe didn't make sense in the natural, because of the history of following, he was able to trust the process and the present. And I just think there's such huge leadership components to transitional seasons. Lead with confidence and clarity, bring calmness, but also trust the process even when it doesn't make sense.
I'm glancing through my Bible as you talk, and the crossing the Jordan River, chapter 3.
Yeah.
I've got more notes jotted down in the corner of the Bible pages than anywhere else, I think. And there was something else that struck me. The consecration of yourself.
Yeah.
In a way, it's preparation too. I mean,
Yeah.
if you've got this great goal of, I don't know, winning the Masters, it's fresh in my mind. There's significant preparation that goes into this.
Yeah.
As a leader, or if you want to be a good dad, like, I want to know from you. Remember that book, What to Expect When Expecting, when you were the expectant father, that your wife would read? Well, my wife read that thing from cover to cover twice because we had 2 kids. She gave me a copy, and do you think I read any of that stuff?
I would imagine that you wanted the Cliff Notes version of it.
That's absolutely right. And I didn't even look at those. Anyhow, so here's the thing. So as I look back on it, now I'm wondering, now it's not like when babies arrived that I was like completely headless, clueless, not knowing what to do.
Right.
This is just, again, emblematic of any big endeavor one goes into, and parenthood could be like arguably the biggest one ever, that sometimes we just go in ill-equipped, and that's a bad idea.
It is. I think this is a great place for you, Mark, just to take 2 minutes and share a little bit of your story of, again, one of the reasons of wanting to do this podcast is you felt like God opened a door that didn't make sense. In light of, again, you were a good golfer, obviously, All-American at Columbus State. You've coached golf, you gave great lessons, but like to have the door open to the opportunity that you've had, your story to me has been, it just in some ways didn't make sense, but you've trusted the process through that. And I think it's just fun for you to share even, how you've trusted that process, moments of, you had to learn from somebody, you had to follow somebody and learn, and you had to step in and be courageous in moments. I'm interested to even hear about the first big tournament you ever called, because it's like, okay, here we were coaching at Columbus State, and now I'm calling the what tournament, and just the process you had to trust to get there.
Oh, a couple of things. First off, as I look at the broadcast career and I look at this endeavor with the greater call alongside you, it's great to have someone belongs alongside. That's the first thing I'd say. There's comfort in having a wing person, wing man, wing woman, whatever. And as I embark on this thing, it's like when the Israelites crossed the Jordan River into the Promised Land. It was at flood stage, and everywhere the priests who were holding the Ark of the Covenant, when they put their foot down, the water would stop. So it was like each step you take, there's provision, if you will. And so I found that throughout my broadcast career, because when I started in radio, I'd never done live radio before, not play-by-play. I'd been on magazine shows and stuff where you get asked a question and you react. I'd never had to watch anyone play something, then describe it for an audience. I'd never done it. So it was amazing how the producer, who's an expert, Justin was his name, Justin Ware. Justin, if you're listening, thank you. I, in fact, thanked him the other day because he came up to me and he goes, "Man, you're big time now with CBS. I remember when," is what he said to me. And that very first day, live radio, I was sent out there with a microphone and I was dispatched to a group, and I've never called live golf. I've not done it. I don't know how. I'd listened to people doing it. And he said to me, he goes, "Mark, go with your group, and when they're ready to play, tell me, and we'll record every one of your shots. And you just record your calls." And so I did that, and I did that, and I didn't hear any playbacks. And then I heard them play back my first. And so they were just recording me, allowing me to learn on the fly, which is a great lesson in leadership. Like in the heat of the battle, protecting me enough, or exposing me, but protecting me enough from a disaster. There's a lesson in this.
Yeah.
And then those got okay. And then he comes to me after a few hours. He goes, okay, you're going to make a live call now. So now it's not like I get to throw the call away if it's recorded and bad. So I cue him and they come to me for the live call, and it went okay. So I got a few live calls, a few recorded calls. So now he's just easing me deeper into the river.
Yeah, wow.
Right? And then a few hours later, he says to me, okay, Mark, now this is all through my IFB, my earpiece. He says, okay, now when you're talking, I'm going to ask you to toss it to somebody. So while I'm calling Kyle Jackson over the putt, I'm in my ear going, okay, toss it to Bill Rosinski, who was my fellow announcer. And now you've got one direction coming in here and you're trying to talk about something else. It's a weird skill. And so we did this and I fumbled out the toss, but it worked and we got better. So now I'm kind of grooving a little bit. Now I'm going down the road. And then he said to me, okay, now this is going to be crazy to you, but we're going to start playing back some of your calls while you're finishing the call. So instead of just recording it and playing it a few seconds later, they started playing it back when I was finishing my call. So I'm talking to you, and in my head, I'm hearing what I've just said a second ago. And like I said, it's a lesson in leadership where it's exposure whilst protecting. And then each time, just another step forward and another step forward, and not bulldozing your way in there. It's kind of just easing your way in. And that was the start. And then the whole thing's ended here. Now I've just decided, because I couldn't resist the noise inside, that I had to now take, because I always felt like there was something more.
Yeah.
Like Joshua, perhaps, where it's like, okay, now I've got to express my faith and yet still teach people, not just golf, but life. Because in the end, we might be good golfers, but we're human beings first.
Right.
We might be great business people, but we're human beings first. And that's where I think this whole thing is. It's the human element where a lot of people are falling short, especially successful leaders. And that's where that was the origin of the show with you and me.
Well, I think, what I heard in all of that, and we'll jump back into Joshua and finish this up, is none of us are where we are without somebody else coming alongside of us.
Yeah.
And I think what we can forget sometimes is early in our careers, I've got the same story of, how to write a message, how to lead an environment, how to lead a room, how to lead from a stage. All of that was protected, and I grew through that in smaller environments with great feedback. Great leaders they love great feedback. It's the only way to get better. But none of us are where we are without somebody else's belief in us and somebody else's tutelage or feedback to us. And then I think we have to remember, even when we get to where you're at, Mark, or wherever that is for you listening, whenever you get to that, we can't forget to still bring those voices alongside of us. I think that's one of the biggest things we miss, is that, Joshua followed Moses for a period of life, and then he stepped into leadership, but Joshua still needed people alongside him during that journey to help him get better. I still need it. You still need it. Every leader listening to this still needs it. Any PGA player needs somebody to still come alongside them. It's fun to watch Rory. The moment that every golfer has when they win something is the first hug they give to is their caddy, because they know they couldn't do it without somebody. Even when they're at the pinnacle of what they do, they still need somebody alongside them to make them better.
Yeah. I want to pose the question then too, because I want to quickly kiss Jericho, because that story was crazy too, and you can all find this in the book of Joshua. But first off, the question is, to all of us aspirant leaders, is not necessarily just who we're learning from, but who are we mentoring? Instead of just being like a consumer, being like, I've learned these lessons, now let's keep passing them on kind of deal. So who, I want to say to folks, leaders, aspirant leaders, dads, moms, who is your Joshua? Who can you continue this legacy by empowering the next leader with more than what you had? I think that's the big question of life too.
Well, the most effective, one of the most effective ways as a leader to continue to grow is, I've always said it this way, Mark, you should always have somebody up, you should always have somebody beside, and you should always have somebody down. You should always have somebody you're learning from. You should always have somebody you're learning with, and you should always have somebody you're teaching. And that's just a great place to be. Learning from somebody that's ahead of you, processing it and learning together with someone that's in the same season, while also pouring it into the next generation beneath you. It's very fulfilling to be learning, growing, and teaching at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. Jericho. So now we're into Israel. I'm going to run a minute or two over. Humor me. We're in Israel. God says, I have given you Jericho. This is God seeing this big walled city. And he goes to Joshua, I've given you Jericho if you do this. And this is amazing how I can imagine I'm the leader of this band of people. And there's a big city, big walls around it. And I'm like, yeah, those walls, they're going to fall down in front of you if you march around here diligently 7 days in a row. And on the seventh day, do it 7 times and scream out my name at the end. And the walls will fall down. You'll take the city. I'm like, geez, really? I mean, God, I trust you and all, but this looks like just a bridge too far. But then in the back of my mind, I've got this, because God said to Joshua all the time, and I am you and saying this to the viewer and the listener, be strong and be courageous. Be strong and courageous, because there's going to be that time when it looks like there's these massive walls in front. And if you just keep doing the right thing, and if you're courageous about it and you keep doing it, the walls will fall down. So you get the parting shot.
Yeah, well, I think God's always going to ask you to do things that are unconventional. There is no playbook to following God. There's no playbook on his plan and future for your life other than being obedient. We've talked about that a lot in some of the other podcasts. And I think that's what Joshua did. He was given unconventional strategies to do something, but he followed it. And then really the non-negotiable for Joshua was courage. And that's why you do hear a lot of the verses from Joshua, be strong and courageous. And I think every person, every leader faces those fears and pressures. But what separates great leaders, what separates people that continue to move forward, is their ability to act decisively, even when they face those unconventional moments, the fear that comes with that, the ability to still act decisively in those moments is what separates great leaders from others. And I think that's what Joshua did. He was given an unconventional strategy. It didn't make sense, but he trusted the process. He saw that God always came through for Moses, and then he acted with confidence, even though it didn't make sense. And then he chose courage over fear. And I think that's why he has a book of the Bible named after him, is that he was just willing to do things others weren't. He was willing to see the glass half full. He was willing to learn and grow through the process. And ultimately, he chose courage over fear. And I think it's just something great for all of us to hear. Whatever you're facing today, where there's a little bit of fear, get into a room, ask God for courage that's beyond your natural courage, and choose your faith over your fear. And there's always something great on the other side.
Okay, and then just to put a bow on Joshua, through it all, Joshua 24:15. But as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. So the Lord comes first. And then toward the end of the chapter, it's chapter 13 at the start, Joshua is now aged. And God comes to him and goes, Joshua, you're very old, but there's still work to do. So I'm going to say, on the heels of what Kyle said, age is only a number. Anything's possible. Be strong, courageous. Just because you're old, that doesn't mean you can't. You might be very old, but go and do it. Thank you for downloading this one. Thanks for sharing this with your friends. Do please follow us on social. The handles are at The Greater Call. This is available on YouTube. Search and subscribe over there. Search for The Greater Call. You can see Kyle's handsome mug wearing his master's cap. And then, of course, whatever you do, be strong, be courageous, and go and be a legend.